All right, I would like to convene this meeting, special Budget and Finance Committee meeting for October 23rd, 2023. And Holly, would you call the roll, please?
Gail Mayhood,
Here.
Jeff Hill,
Here.
Jim Bond,
Here.
Jim Mosier,
Here.
and Monica Martinez is absent, but she was said that she was going to be here, so she's
Maybe
probably
she'll
on her
slide
way.
in.
You know, the traffic coming north is just a
There are
nightmare.
3 lane closures
Yeah.
between Felton and here.
Yeah.
Tree trimming and
Okay. All right, so we'll note if she arrives, we'll note it in the minutes when she arrives. Okay, we have one item of business today, and that is unfinished business, the rate study update. And Rick, did you want to say anything?
First off, we do have our intern finance manager joining us today, Heather, and I can't pronounce her last name.
Heather, help them out.
Can you help me out here?
Sure, I Paletti.
Okay.
I Paletti, yeah.
And we also have Raftelis with us today. And I guess Raftelis will kick it off, or?
Okay, well, let me
Go
just
ahead.
start with a few comments. I want to, since not everybody has met Heather, I'd like to just quickly introduce her. I think she lives up in the wine country. She has a degree in business administration and as a CPA, and we're really lucky to have her jump in as an interim. I've been very impressed when I've worked with her so far. She's been the finance director and then the administrative services director for the cities of Windsor and Healdsburg up in the wine country. And she's with Healdsburg, she's had experience with Prop 218 processes. And most recently, she was the CFO for Community Action Partnership of Sonoma County. So we're very fortunate that we got somebody this experienced to come help us at this time while we advertise for a permanent person. So welcome.
Hey,
Heather.
thank you, Heather.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gail. Thank you.
And just before we start and turn it over to Heather and Teresa, I just want to say that it was maybe a misnomer to call the thing that we got the presentation. I think I want to make it clear that that wasn't actually what was intended to go out to the board.
Mhm.
And I think I initially read it with that in mind. And I thought, oh my God, it's too long. It's not very understandable. But rather what they were doing was Raftelis was giving us the numbers, responding to the requests that we made to give us multiple alternatives, okay?
Mhm.
And so my goal for this meeting today is to winnow that down and basically get the sense of the committee what options we want to present to the board, preferably maybe one option. And although we can compare it with the others and explain why we didn't go with some others. Basically, that's what I want to come out of this. And any comments that we need to make to Heather and Teresa to change what we have and how we want it presented. And I just want to also make it clear that it will be Heather who will be kind of revising the final product here, taking the lead on that. So if you've got any questions, concerns, comments, please go ahead and just send them directly to her, and I will distribute her contact information after the meeting to make sure that everybody has it. Be careful that you don't send it to too many people in the committee because we don't want to violate the Brown Act. So with no more than 2. And then she will, eventually when it goes to the board, it will be Heather and Teresa or somebody else from Raftelis who will be taking the lead on the presentation. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to Heather and Teresa.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you very much. Gail has essentially stolen my introduction.
Okay.
So thank you, Gail. You're making my job really easy. So I am actually going to turn it directly over to Teresa. Again, committee, we are looking ideally to get your feedback on all of these 6 options and best case scenario, that you would recommend one, give your blessing to one of these options so that we know which one to really put in our time on that presentation for November 2nd, and which one you can give that blessing to the board. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa, and thank you, Gail. Thank you very much. Teresa, you're on.
It says host has disabled participant screen sharing. So if you could turn that on so I could share the screen, that'd be great.
On here. It's not on here.
This,
Make your host.
that's what I'll have to do.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, committee, for having us here today to kind of walk you through the rate options that we've developed, kind of giving you sort of the summary answers, and then we have background information and data that we can walk you through. I also would like to point out that I have my colleagues Sudhir Pardawala and Lindsay Roth on the phone with me today as well. So where are we in this rate study? We've done the financial planning and the cost of service analysis, and we're in this rate design portion here with today's Budget and Finance Committee meeting, and then the November 2nd board meeting. And then the next steps after that, once we settle on some rates, we come back. The plan is to come back on the November 16th board meeting for the rate authorization. This is where the board kind of gives its final buy-off on the proposed rate schedules and gives the direction to prepare the Prop 218 notice. And then the final step is to issue that Prop 218, have the 45-day noticing period, and then a planned January 18th public hearing, so that rates can become effective on February 1st. So as a reminder, the selected financial plan for the water enterprise is 2 years of 10% overall revenue adjustments, followed by 3 years of 7% per year. So these represent the overall rate-based revenue, additional revenue that needs to be brought in to cover your revenue requirements, your annual expenses, O&M, capital, making sure you have sufficient funds in your reserves, etc. But individual bills will change based on meter size and how much they use and the ultimate rate structure that is selected. So as a refresher from the Rates 101, what is cost of service? This is the method of how we recover your cost or your revenue requirements between your fixed charges and your variable charges, and then from your individual customer classes. So we follow the best practices from the American Water Works Association and the Water Environment Federation on the wastewater side for conducting this cost of service analysis. So what this slide is showing, it's looking at what is called revenue neutral. So this is saying what do things look like without that 10% overall revenue adjustment? Are your customer classes over collecting or under collecting based on the cost of service analysis that we did? And so what we see here is that single family seems to be about spot on, but then these other customer classes, the commercial class, which includes multifamily, and we've done that based on the peaking similarities. So these customer classes, the commercial, industrial, irrigation, et cetera, were created based on looking at the billing data and their usage characteristics to sort of group them into similar groups. So commercial includes multifamily. And right now it looks like it's somewhat over collecting in revenues, and industrial and irrigation, et cetera, are under collecting. So the cost of service will help realign that over under.
Heather, can I interrupt you here and just go back to that slide you were, excuse me, not Heather, Teresa, that can you explain where the the mobile home parks would be in this classification,
In the
where the
school.
schools would be, and where the parks would be. Um,
I don't know where your mobile homes, I don't know if the building data says we are categorized as like commercial, multifamily, industrial, irrigation, so I don't have categorizations to know where those particular customers fall.
Gail, I will contact staff during the presentation, so I hope to find out that information for you before the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And the surplus water station am I to interpret that as bulk sales, the sort of, Rick, can you just elaborate on that? Because it's not really surplus water, it's,
Yeah, it's not really surplus water, it's alternative water, because we don't classify it as surplus. We don't really have surplus water.
right, we never do.
But it's what's tank trucks, construction water. Right now, Big Basin's hauling
Right.
that water by truck up to them. And it'll private residents with 4 wells also haul water.
Okay.
But it is hauling water.
And Scotts Valley, the few times when their wells are,
They pay our regular bulk rate or our regular commercial rate, I do believe.
is the commercial rate.
I'll double check that.
Okay, why don't we,
So the surplus water would be the truck I saw the other day out there hooked up to a fire hydrant.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way they meter that is they do a load count. They count the number of loads and
Yeah,
charge.
count the number of loads, what's the capacity of the truck. Yeah.
Could you also just give us a brief description of how you calculate this revenue neutral for these various classes? I don't understand it.
So we've developed the financial plan, and so we know how much, let me back up. So we know how much your revenue requirements are, and we allocate your costs to different functions. So is it base, is it peaking, is it treatment, is it transmission, distribution? And we take those allocations, and based on the demands of the different customer classes, so their annual usage, the peaking they place on the system, the number of customers, et cetera, those costs get allocated out to the customer classes. So that revenue neutral column says, how much revenue should you be getting from these customer classes if there was no revenue adjustment?
Okay.
And then the current revenue is like where under your current rates and the number of customers and usage, where does that fall out right now? So we're trying to take away that the addition of that revenue adjustment in there to kind of make it an easier comparison.
okay, so this is what's required of us legally, is to allocate the costs. So can you just explain briefly what the peaking charge is about?
Well, just okay. So you have to size your system to meet, or different components of your system are sized to meet different requirements. So, say your pipe, if it was just sized to meet average day, would be, X diameter, but you need to be able to deliver water on like a max day basis. So your pipe has to be incrementally larger to be able to have the flows go through it to meet your max day and or your peak hour requirements. So that's what we're trying to get at when we look at the differences in the customer characteristics.
Okay, so for example, irrigation is because you use it at particular times of the year and particular times of the day, and that's why it's been sort of under we're basically subsidizing that because we haven't taken into account peaking charges correctly, or?
Well, it's a function of having a uniform rate for all of your customers. So when you have just one rate for everybody, then you look at then your rates are based on what's the system doing as a whole. When we start looking at different customer classes, then we can see the differentiation. We're like, oh, irrigation customers are placing a peaking demand on your system because their average use is rather low, but then we get into like the summer months where they're lawn watering or irrigating, then all of a sudden the demand is increased, and that demand for everybody's kind of increasing, except for maybe your commercial customers and such that might only have like a little bit of landscaping. So it allows us to kind of parse out those differences and those extra costs that the system was sized to meet, to be able to provide the supply when it's needed.
Thank you, that helps.
That really helps, and I'm taking it that probably if we did percentage of total volume, the single family would be by far, we'd be up in the 80 to 90% of all the water.
Yeah, you are predominantly single family.
So
in
these
your-
other
in your
categories are
usage.
pretty small, and the adjustments wouldn't be very much.
Yeah, oh yeah, on a percent of overall total usage basis, the other customer classes are pretty small. I don't have the percentages handy.
Commercial's the only one that looks like there's.
Hi, this is Sudhir. Just looking at the revenues, you can see what percentage of the total revenues are coming from single family. That close to about 80%.
Oh, I see. Just use those percentages. Got it.
Got it. So
Great.
so
That
really-
gives you an idea. Yeah.
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I move on? Are there any other questions? I will forge ahead. So as a refresher from the Rates 101 meeting that we had this summer, the three kind of main priorities that came out of that discussion were revenue stability, affordability, and conservation. So we kind of kept that in mind as we were looking at the mix of fixed versus variable revenue, and then the different structures, uniform for different customer classes, and how many tiers for residential, and should there even be tiers for residential. So one of the things to kind of keep in mind with regards to revenue stability, you get that by increasing the fixed charge or the fixed charge portion of the bill. But that fixed charge has a larger impact on your lower water users than your higher water users. So if you don't use very much water, then the portion of your bill that's fixed and can't change each month is larger than it would be for, say, somebody who's using, say, 100 cubic feet a month or something. Then the fixed charge becomes a much smaller portion of their bill. So the lower users feel that impact a little bit more than your larger users do. And then addressing conservation, the average single family customer is at 600 cubic feet a month, which is pretty low. That's actually about 70% of the annual usage for the single family class. So something to keep in mind is, are there other reasons for having the tiering than conservation? Because depending on where those tiers are and the rates that fall out of there, if you get more conservation from, say, those highest tier users, then you've reduced your water usage. And then do you have to go down the road and have additional revenue adjustments because you end up not having the revenue you projected because there was some price sensitivity to those highest users. And that's hard to quantify because that you just don't know what's called the price elasticity of those highest users. They might be price insensitive and it won't matter, but some may be.
Hard to know. Can you tell me the difference between the average single family and the median? What I'm worried about is that the average can be warped by.
The median is 4, so it's actually a little lower than the average.
Okay, so that's quite a bit lower. So I guess that's my response is why would we not talk about the median value
It's,
calculating?
I often bring up, the median and people are like, please use average. I think, you know, statisticians like the median and the general public kind of understand average a little bit better, so that's why you'll
Well,
see
actually,
it.
they don't. That's the problem. Is they don't realize that the average is warped by
Yeah,
large users. It's kind of like the average income in the US, if you include Bill Gates, and Elon Musk, makes us all
Yeah.
a whole lot
Yeah.
richer.
no, I'm with you, but I seem to, you're one of the few who wants the mean, or the median, I mean.
I know, but
Um,
no, the only
yeah.
reason I'm not being pedantic here, although I often am as a professor, but the point is that it's important, because if that's the more typical usage, around 4, that's where we, in my view, should be kind of centering our efforts to make things more neutral there, and then we can hit people above that. And so it's basically, you sort of, in the material you sent us, it looks like you sort of balance things on 6 CCF. And I'm just wondering, given that that now includes 70% of the annual usage, shouldn't we have something a little lower, but
It would be worthwhile to
see what,
to look at it both ways
yeah.
And
before we.
I'll get into that when we get into the next couple of
Okay.
slides.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
So I have one other question also
Sure.
on revenue stability, where you were mentioning that increasing the fixed charge is a disproportionate problem for the low users. What happens if we, for example, look at how much usage is in the bottom 10% of our user base? How much, take the bottom 10% in terms of how much they use, and just include that in the basic fee. That if you did that, the people who might normally have been heavily impacted basically aren't impacted at all, or very little.
Well, I mean, that gives them, they're the 100% fixed charge then, which gives them, I mean, I guess they know what their bills are every single month, so there's stability in knowing that.
We could say the fixed charge, I mean, across the board, you could say the fixed charge includes this much water, which isn't much, but would be important.
Yeah, and
Bottom
some folks do
10%.
that. I'm not sure how common that is. I don't know, Sudhir, if you know how common that is, or pluses and minuses for.
Is it legal? Can you do it? I mean, is it legal?
You can set up the rate structure in that manner. I think the reason for doing that is basically you're trying to identify again the fixed costs associated with the system, irrespective of how much water is used. You're saying that there's a fixed cost associated, so you want to collect that, that minimum charge kind of from users, irrespective of whether they use water or not. What would happen, I guess, is you would then essentially, if you're saying that you need to say X amount of water in that fixed charge or the minimum charge, basically you're increasing that fixed cost again for all meters essentially.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. I think very few agencies actually do that anymore. It used to be more common before, but I don't think that too much of that happening right now. Yeah.
I mean, you can accomplish the same thing by just making the first tier.
Right,
Be
it might have a 218 problem because somebody goes away and doesn't use any water, they're still having to pay.
Yeah.
For
That's
for water that they don't
use.
receive.
That's a good point.
So
Some people.
I think what Gail said might be better to add a tier for that.
okay.
So the basic charge is, this is what it costs.
Yeah.
For you to
No
turn
matter
to turn on the faucet.
Yeah.
There are also people that use so little water that every other month they have an amount charge because it doesn't show up as a whole unit for the second month.
Oh,
And then the
yeah.
third month it does show up as a unit, and then the fourth month it doesn't. And so
Oh,
it's like,
okay.
Interesting.
that happens too.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay. Go ahead.
And just some other things to keep in mind, is that, each alternative recovers the same amount of revenue requirements. We're all they all get to the same place. It's how do we get there? And as we keep reiterating, alternatives impact customers differently, and totals might not add due to rounding. I know there's usually somebody that's in their paper and pencil adding things, so there's just between the rounding, sometimes they don't, what you see on screen doesn't add up to the exact same penny. So for reminder, the current water rate structure, you have a monthly service charge, and then you have a volumetric charge, a uniform charge for all your customers, and then a separate uniform charge for surplus, or I guess hauled water. It's called surplus in the billing database, so that's why we use that term. And currently, you're recovering about 31% of your rate-based revenue through your fixed charge. So we developed basically three main options, and then there's an overlay on whether we're recovering 35% through the fixed charge or 45% through the fixed charge. So that 35% is sort of the new base minimum, working with district staff on the cost allocations and making sure that we've appropriately allocated the cost. The new base amount would be 35%. And then we also looked at what if we increase the fixed recovery to 45%. So the first option, and this is on the fixed side, and this is the same for all three options. We still have the monthly service charge, but now it only captures basically your operating and maintenance costs and reserved targets associated with those. We have a capital charge that recovers your capital related costs, and then you have about 100 or so private fire line customers. So these are customers that are getting having their own sort of separate line coming in, and so we pulled that cost out so that those customers are paying for that service that they're getting. And then in options one, that's keeping the volumetric for your current structure, so uniform for all your customers, plus that cost for the surplus or hauled water. Options 2 and 3 both look at creating customer classes, so breaking out this residential, the commercial / multifamily, industrial, and irrigation. And then option 2 looks at a 3-tier residential structure, and option 3 looks at a 2-tier residential structure. So looking more specifically at the option 2 with the 3-tier structure, these tiers were set looking at the winter low and the summer peak. So that's an average winter low usage was 4 CCF, which happens to also be the median usage. Make sure I'm getting my terms correct. The median usage. So half the bills, single family bills, fall at or under 4, and the other half are kind of at or above 4. That happens to also tie into your winter low. So what we're trying to capture in that first tier is an estimate of what is your indoor usage. The second tier, we looked at the average summer peak, and that was 8 CCF. So the second tier is capturing what's kind of like on average what's used for indoor plus outdoor, and then anything over 8 is getting to the folks who are really using either using a lot, or maybe there's a lot of people that are maybe they just have a large family and there's no way, it might not be any way around that. So that's how those 3 tiers were defined for option 2. Option 3, we went and looked at the single family residential density and then gallons per capita day amount. The current water efficiency standard in California is 55. There are some proposed reductions to about into the upper 40s. Since those are proposed and not enacted, we didn't want to go quite that low. So we went just a couple points lower than what the current water efficiency level is at 55. And when we do that, it just happened to come out that it would be about 6 CCF. We did not aim for that in any way. It just turned out to be that way. So the first tier is kind of getting to what's sort of the average usage for a single family house. And then anything over that would fall into the second tier. So those are how the two different options, tiering options were set.
What does density refer to?
The people per household, so like 3 persons per household.
Right, okay, so this is basically the median size of households in the valley.
Yes.
Is, okay.
And that's
where does that-
how much they use.
No, the
Well-
first one, density is how many people
Yeah,
live in
yeah.
a typical household, right?
Yep.
And where does that information come from?
It's the 5-year American Community Survey.
So this is in America, it's not in the San Lorenzo Valley?
Well, it's the American Community Survey is the name of the survey that does it from the Census Bureau.
Oh,
And
okay.
then we look at your area.
Okay, yeah, all right. So, I mean, I think it's right, 3, because I actually went and looked at the census data directly, and it was a little under 3.
That's what I
but,
saw too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Right,
think it's
so
like,
that's
it's a
what that-
little, a little under 3, but around 3.
all right. Got it.
Okay. So lots of math done and the cost of service stuff, and we have some of the details that we can show you and can show you kind of how we derive the fixed charges and what the 5-year rate schedules would look like, but kind of skipping ahead to kind of what does the answer look like for different options. So if we look at a single family bill at that average use of 6 CCF, then you can see here the first column is under your current rates. What would that bill look like? The next 3 options are at the new baseline of 35% fixed cost recovery. And the second 3 set of options, the last 3 to the right, are at 45%. And you can kind of see that as the darker part of the column is a little bit higher on the right 3 than on options 1A, 2A, and 3B. The other thing you'll notice here is that they're all
There's much difference.
yeah, not a lot of difference. I mean, obviously that's like, a Starbucks, London Fog, tall coffee difference between there, but not, 30 or 40 or $50 a month kind of difference. So they're kind of all in the same realm. So there's no obvious, this is the clear winner. And then we have similar graphs for the very low use. So this is at 2 CCF. This is at 10th percentile usage, falls at 2 CCF. So you can see where those bills would be. So you can see just in general that the darker portion of the column, so you can see that a larger portion of the bill happens to be fixed. But then there'd still be a little variation based on the 2 CCF between the different options. And then we also did it for the very high use. So this is at the 90th percentile. So that's 11 CCF. And again, you can see the fixed charge is a smaller portion of the overall bill. You can see sort of the order of magnitude of where those bills fall. So what we're hoping to get from this committee today is a feel for, do you like the 35% fixed cost? Do you want the 45% and have a little bit more of that revenue stability? And then on the single family, do you prefer the 2-tier or the 3-tier?
Jeff,
And then, oh,
do you want
me
to now, or you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, do you want to discuss that now, or do you want me to show you the wastewater stuff really quick? Because that's about a slide or 2.
No, I think the
Oh.
wastewater stuff is really,
It's such a small part of our business. Let's focus on
let's
this.
ignore that
Okay.
for today's meeting. I think it's just not, and it's not gonna be contentious from what I've seen at the board.
I
So-
hope.
Okay, great.
Go ahead.
3%, pretty darn good.
So
Yeah,
personally, I think the stability aspect is very important for us. We found this last couple of years, for example, that people started using a lot less water because of drought conditions and things like that, and that affected our income. So I'm actually in favor of the 45% fixed recovery. When you look at the fact that 90+% of our costs are in the fixed column anyway, I think we as an agency are better off at the 45% fixed than we were at 35. Single family residential, I'd have to look at the slides again. But this is, let's see, this is how many tiers is this one? This is,
This
Is
is,
three tiers,
so 2A, so
Okay,
option 2 is the 3-tier, the option 3 is the 2-tier. Sorry about that. We had gotten some initial direction to just show the 3 tiers, so that's why it's option 2. So just reverse
Yeah.
the numbers in your head and you'll know which tier it is, I guess.
so if we went with option B, which is the 45%, there isn't a cup of coffee difference there between those hardly. So I guess I don't really care.
I think the problem is if you look at the low use, and if you were to look at what not the average, but the median usage, which is closer to 4.
Yeah.
What you see here is, and I totally agree with you, Jeff. I want
Yeah.
us to land on 45% for all the reasons that you've talked about. Because I think if we stick with 35%, we're almost forced to go to some kind of drought reserve
Yes.
charge, like Santa Cruz has, to just protect our revenue. But here, if you look at like 2A versus 2B, you see that that's a current versus 2B is a big jump. It's like
Yeah.
$15, which is a lot. But the other thing I noticed, and I might be wrong on this, Teresa, but when I compared the 2B versus 2A, what I noticed was that the tiering of the rates was quite different. It was I thought it looked much steeper in 2A than it did in 2B. If I remember those slides, and I don't know, maybe you can call them up, that the B scenario had very little difference between the cost of those, had very little difference between the 3 categories. And so as a result, it didn't give much of a break to the lower users, and it didn't, how do I put it, sock it to the higher users as much as the A version did.
So you're talking about the actual volumetric charges between the three
Yeah,
tiers and the 2 tiers.
Right. So here in A, you've got you're almost doubling the cost of water in terms of the volumetric charge. Yeah. Or no?
Well, let's see, that for usage that falls within tier 2, it's about $3 more per 100 cubic feet.
Okay.
And then for usage over 8, it's another $5 per CCF
All right.
for any
So
usage over 8.
there's like an 80% increase between the two. So can you now show us what the difference is with 2B? See, that's only $2 difference. That's.
I need to get
like I was
Slow
talking
down
about.
there.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just trying to get to make sure I'm in the right. So 2B volumetric chart. So this is
That's the 2-tier option. We want the 3-tier option.
we just looked at the 3-tier option.
Okay, I'm sorry. What I want to compare is the 2A. This isn't 2B. This is actually the 3-tier. It's 3B.
No, this is 2-tier. Here, tier 1, tier 2.
2-tier option.
This is the 2-tier option.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, that
It's mislabeled.
it's
Yes.
just, yeah, but it is the 2-tier.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is 3B.
Right. So what I want to compare is 2A and 2B.
2B, exactly.
Okay,
And this is not 2B. This is 3B.
hold on a second.
To be or not to be.
So you want 2B and 3B.
No, we're at 2B and
Because you
3.
want the two, you want,
What
you
I'm
want,
trying
you want
to-
the 2 tier at
Sure, this is it.
45%
This is
and
it.
the
Okay,
3
this is
tier
it.
at 45%,
Oh,
correct?
this is it.
Stop. All right. The point here is that the difference between the lowest tier and the highest tier is a little over $3. Okay, in this option. In the other option for 35% fixed, the difference between the lowest tier and the highest tier was $8. So what I don't understand, that's my point, is why are we using a different sort of ratio of tiering for these
We're-
two options?
We're not using a different ratio. It's because of the impact of moving more money into the fixed charge. So there's 10% less revenue being recovered through the volume metric charge. And so that just, and to get the extra 10% into the fixed charge, we move some of the max day and max hours. So we move some of the peaking out of peaking and into fixed. So it's going to soften the differences between the charges, because we move the peak capacity and saying, like, you had to build your pipe to be so big, so that's fixed. So we can move some of that cost into the fixed charge. So that's why you're seeing the differentials getting smaller, because we moved some of the peak costs into the fixed cost recovery.
Why do you have to do that? Doesn't seem like that's necessary. Why wouldn't the peak charges be totally associated with the volumetric rate?
To get to, and this is sort of like the industry standard way of, if you want to get more into your fixed charge, we start moving the peaking related cost over in a meter. I don't know, Sudhir, if you've got something that you can add.
Yeah, that's basically it. When we are doing this cost allocation, you have your costs for volumetric costs, which are quite low, but the way the operation costs are allocated, is based on the average consumption. So those are costs that are allocated to the commodity rate. Then you have the peaking charges, which can be allocated either to the commodity rates, or they can go into your fixed charges. So that is one way of increasing your fixed cost, is by moving some of the peaking costs, which are basically costs associated with maintaining the system, the higher capacity in the system. Those can be considered as fixed charges as well. So in the process of doing this rate design, we determine kind of where exactly we want to see how much revenue we want to collect from the fixed charges, and we are therefore take a certain portion of those peaking costs and put it into the fixed charges. So the more you put it into the fixed charges, the less differential you're going to have in your commodity rates, because the main difference between the tiers and the commodity is the peaking cost.
Okay, so I understand that, but what I don't understand is why you have to do that, given the fact that you've determined that right now our fixed costs are actually about 90%. Right, so it's like you've got this whole extra bunch of fixed costs that you could shift between the volumetric and the fixed rate, right?
Right, that is true.
So why do you choose to put the peaking rates over in the fixed part when there's plenty of them left over?
And let me just say, the concern I have about this is that for the very low users, I'm worried about the folks with very low income. I would like to see an option where we do get the 45% of fixed costs, because we need that for stability, but we're able to lessen the impact on the very low users and the folks who are low income. So is there a way we can do that with the three tiers, by increasing the variability across the three tiers? Or is that, you're saying this is the industry standard? Are there alternative ways to do it that would get us by the 218 challenge?
Yes, you can potentially, yeah, we would have to change. Typically what we do for utilities such as yours, which are primarily residential communities and, you know, retail customers, there's a method called the base capacity method. That is the pretty much the standard that is used for retail agencies. If we change the allocation methodology to a different method, which is called the commodity demand method, I think that would potentially allow you to take what we consider as base cost in the current methodology into the fixed component, and that would allow you to then have higher fixed charges and lower commodity rates, because your costs for producing water are very minimal. You know, those are you are essentially getting water for, you know, very low cost. So the rest of the costs are fixed, and therefore it's possible to do that under a different methodology.
Well, I think basically, I think that's where I would like to end up, is with this 3-tier system, with it tiered more steeply, so that it shifts the where we're getting the income from, and it also, besides making it a little bit better for the lower income people,
Right.
it would also be a little bit more of an incentive to conserve, because right now, frankly, a 30% range across the whole the 3 tiers is not a very strong incentive.
Yeah.
The other one had is a stronger incentive to conserve the A schedule.
The one thing that you need to bear in mind is as it is, your users are using very little water compared to what is considered average in California.
Yeah.
So by tiering and putting much higher rates on the larger users, essentially you're asking them to conserve even more, which in a sense would reduce your revenues coming in if they start to conserve. And that means that you get into a cycle where you have to keep increasing rates to provide the revenues that you need to meet your fixed costs.
So let me
you
ask.
have to be careful in that regard.
Let me ask Rick a question here. Because the system has to be pressurized at all times, it has to be full, right? So at any given time, if everybody's faucet in the whole district is turned off, nobody is using any water, we nevertheless still have all these pipes full of water. So that's effectively a capital cost to me, because you can't run the system without having that much water sitting there in the pipes. I don't know how that, to me, that's part of our fixed cost, as opposed to the incremental cost for when people start actually using some of the water. We have to have, I don't know, 100,000 gallons worth of water sitting there in pipes at all times.
Yeah, and you also got to include fire flow sitting there at all times.
Yeah.
That, which is the biggest part of our storage.
Yeah, so what I'm looking at is, just like we have a fixed cost to have a pipe in the ground, actually that pipe has to be full of water too. So that quantity of water is a fixed cost, because it never goes away. No, I don't know where that leads us, that line of thinking.
I was thinking that myself.
It's just another way of explaining to the public why we need to increase the fixed costs from 31 to 45.
Yeah.
I don't know if it really necessarily impacts this, because we're already at 90% fixed costs, the way not even including that. I mean, if we were really to make a pie chart, it would probably mean that pie chart would be, instead of 90%, it'd be at 91%.
And a lot of those fixed costs are whether people use water or not.
Yeah.
You got to keep that in mind, with maintenance and operations and so forth. Just because people don't use water, it doesn't mean that we still don't have those fixed costs.
I'm just saying that if you got a pipe there and it's a live pipe, it's got water in it, and even if nobody's using it, if there's nothing's flowing, it's still there under pressure.
That's correct. And we are required by like California State Health to maintain a minimum of 20 PSI at all times.
Yeah.
In our system.
So that means at all times, we've got some number of hundreds of thousands of gallons of water sitting there in pipes that is a minimum fixed quantity that you have to have, whether it's being used or not.
So going back, Sudhir, to the point you brought up, that you have to be careful that you don't make the uppermost tier so high that people start to conserve. But there's another way, and I take that point. But right now, there's not much of a jump between the first tier and the second tier. It's very small, 10%. And another way to do this, it seems to me, would be to make that jump, a little bit larger. And what proportion of our usage is above 8%? I guess which is another way, 8 CCM is another way of asking, should that tier be set at some larger number if we go to a steeper tiering, so that most of our revenue is going to come from the middle tier?
About 20% of your usage is over 8% in your
Okay.
single family customers.
Okay, thank you for that information. I think that's actually a context that we need up front in the presentation, as we need,
It's on this
0 to 2,
slide.
2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, and I realize it's in the backup, but it's
No,
not.
it's right here, 21%.
I know, but we need a little bit more specificity. In other words, to say that nearly, that more than half comes from 0 to 4, that doesn't tell me about, well, what about that lowest 10 or 20, which is kind of the one we're worried about.
Okay,
So
so
just
the
as-
people in the high tier, thinking about the demographics of the valley here. While on one hand, we are rural, we adjoin one of the wealthiest, just a couple miles over the border is one of the wealthiest communities in the world. And I'm just speculating here that the people in that high usage may be very insensitive to what we charge them, because a substantial portion of them may be people from Silicon Valley with a whole lot of money. I don't know, I'm just guessing.
It's a big mix.
It's a mix, but it's mainly people who have big gardens, I think. I mean, like, we have a big garden.
Yeah.
We're trying to shift it to needing less water. This would be an incentive for us to make that move continue.
Yeah.
So we're watering less, but my bet is that a big chunk of them are people with big
It's
gardens.
gardens.
Yeah.
Well, then that would,
Yeah.
then
There's
that wouldn't
irrigation
matter.
in the summer.
I was envisioning, Bill Gates's front yard, with acres.
Well, a lot of the people have big gardens, can afford it because they have more money than the. So there is an overlap of income and
Yeah,
water
but it's
usage,
not
but it's
clear.
not.
It's not a clear.
I think he's right. When I let my lawn die, my water bill literally was cut in half.
Yeah, you gotta look at, as you drive the valley in our areas, when you go to the sandy soils, the Scotts Valley area, yes, the houses are bigger, but it's also a more sandy, much hotter
Oh, the
climate
water goes right
than the
through it.
redwoods, and there are no very few gardens up in the Boulder Creek, Ben Lomond, then it starts to change because you have the heavily dense forest
Yeah.
up in the Boulder
Yeah,
Creek
I don't have
area.
sunlight for much.
They
of it.
use half the amount of water that when you go down to Scotts Valley in those open sandy areas.
Yeah.
And you'll find the big users will complain that the tiers, they never see the lower tiers. They jump
Yeah.
right into the higher tiers. And that's your mobile home parks, your
Yeah.
camps, and your schools and your laundromats that hit the much higher, your top 10 water users.
I'm in the Sand Hills area. I could run my hose all day long and then
And
turn it off, and an hour later, the whole thing's dry.
Chair Mayhood?
Yeah.
I did get some information. The mobile home parks are not considered commercial.
So what are they?
They're considered multi-users,
multifamily, yeah.
family users.
But in their
But in their
analysis, they put multifamily together
They
with.
have more classes than that.
Oh, I just
Yeah. What about the school? I think the school is really important.
Well, we are gonna hear from
Yeah.
Heather at the very end.
Yeah.
She's gonna come back and tell us.
Schools.
Yeah.
But, so Jim Bond, we haven't heard from you yet.
So,
And then I'm gonna ask Heather if she has the information that,
Sure.
that we need about classes.
just a couple of comments. One is a $10 difference for me isn't very much, but for somebody on a low fixed income, $10, they're gonna notice a $10 a month. So I'd say just backing up, anything we can do to mitigate the changes in the lower, that's important. So let me make my main comment. Now that I understand this, thank you, and I understand the differences. I'm going to repeat a story I told several months ago. In my previous life, we brought in a bunch of customers to a software company to ask them how we should license our software to them. We had 4 or 5 different licensing mechanisms. And we spent 2 days in a conference room talking about it. And we kind of came to a conclusion. And in the last 5 minutes of the second day, one of the customers stood up and said, let me just say this. This is all interesting to you, the vendor, but basically all we care about is what's the bottom line? We just want to pay the least possible. So how we do it, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, if the differences are small, I don't think generally people are going to care. I think we may have some reasons for making it 2 or 3. And I agree with your comment on increasing the fixed. But at the end of the day, as a ratepayer,
Bottom line.
I don't really care. I mean, if you tell me that my rates are going to go up at 10 or 20%, I'm like, okay, bitch moan. But it's not the end of the world. Now, big differences people will care about. So I think you guys are heading on the right track here.
And none of these are really large differences.
Well, I think there's a problem. Now, we're only looking at the first year. I think we need to see what it looks like over the 5 years, because I think you would find from year 1 to year 5 that we're talking fairly
It's a
significant.
50%, but I think there's a slide that has that though. It's 50, yeah.
No, they're in the backup.
Yeah,
they
that's
show
what
it
in the
from
backup.
what the 5.
Oh, no, I'm not, as a
Yeah.
ratepayer, I'm not thrilled with the idea of a 50% rate increase. I mean, just one other thing. I pretended I was a ratepayer and I went out and I Googled, costs of water around, and there's a bunch of people that have done studies. And today, we have maybe the highest rate in the whole state today. When I compare us to several 2019, 2022 studies done that you can get on the first page of a Google search, we're already high. And 50% is, I think that's going to be the challenge. Not so much whether or not it's.
Well, everybody's going to go up with inflation, right? So
Hopefully that's the
I
case.
think,
Yeah, it's just a question of when their next study comes out.
Yeah. a lot
so,
of
but you're
process.
right. We are, I mean, Santa Cruz in their recent rate study, you can go and look at that. And there's a graph that shows everybody. And the only people locally that are higher than us are Montera. For whatever reason.
Okay.
We're not that far off of Scotts Valley, but Santa Cruz is way lower, but that's because they can spread their expenses over a huge population. And so, there's a lot of reasons for it, but
And their meters are only 100 feet apart.
Exactly.
Well, we haven't addressed it in this meeting, but as long as we're here, I'm gonna take another 2 minutes, and that is that when we get ready to announce a rate increase, we better line up a study that says, this is what other like people do. This is what they do up the peninsula, and this is what they do in Monterey. I think we need to do that. And I mean, I was forced to do it myself. And if we just use the stuff that's available on the first page of a Google search, we look real bad.
well, we're going to look bad when we do what you said. I mean, I've gone through that exercise, and part of the problem is that there are very few comparables, in the sense that not only do you have to have a district that is high topography, subject to natural disasters, is dispersed in the area that it covers, it also has to be adjacent to an extremely expensive area with a high cost of living. So if you try to compare us, for example, to Mendocino, which would be similar in terms of
Right.
earthquakes, landslides, floods, it's meaningless
So the-
because their salaries are so much lower.
These reports included Marin. We're like way higher than Marin.
Well,
I would
again, Marin is, has certain, they're spreading it out over a lot more people,
No,
for one.
Yeah.
And they don't have wells. I mean, so all I'm saying is I absolutely agree with you, but it is so hard to find comparable places. I mean, Marin is one, and you probably are gonna have to include it. Monterey is the part of Monterey that is Cal-Am runs.
right, that's really what I'm talking about, Cal-Am.
Is worth looking at.
They're pretty high,
And
actually.
they're high,
We're only about
Yeah.
double what they are.
so,
And we'd have to look at when their study was done too, because anything before 2020
Yeah.
Is, if it hasn't been adjusted, it will be.
I'll just wrap up by saying, when we get ready to present this,
Yeah.
I would expect that Raft House or us or somebody would actually have, and you're right, there's no sense in comparing us to San Jose.
Yeah.
And we got to I'm sold, but we got to sell the people who are going to do something like I did, which is a Google search.
I think,
Do we have any people out
yeah.
online?
Holly, do we have anybody online that we need to?
Yes.
His hand's not raised.
Let,
Lou Ferris is online, but his hand is. not
okay, well,
raised.
let me give him the opportunity if he
just raised
wants to, yeah, go ahead, Lou. Thank you for reminding me.
Lou, you're on mute.
Why you can't speak.
Well, in the meantime, while we're getting him sorted away, if the mobile home parks and multifamily are in commercial, I guess I'm wondering, and commercial was the second category that mattered. The other ones, frankly, it's not even worth talking about. If their rates are uniform, is that, what do I want to say, equitable, because they're not being asked to conserve? And, maybe we don't care, but
Well, keep
what
in
do people think
mind
about
too,
that?
with the mobile home parks, they have master meters where they're not charged individual
Yeah.
service charges.
no,
So
I realize
they're
that.
getting a reduced, if each coach had its own meter and paid the service charge and for its water use, their bills would be a lot
higher.
higher.
They're getting a good deal.
They're
So
getting.
that's what I'm
They may
saying.
not think so. I've been
Yeah,
there, but they are getting a good deal.
So they're getting a good deal, and also there's, like, in a drought, there'd be very little reason for them to stop watering their lawns or whatever, because
Fortunately, they have small lawns.
Yeah, and they've, and
but-
our mobile home parks have done quite a bit to reduce
okay,
spring lakes and
Yeah,
uses
that was what I was
reclaimed water.
That's true.
Vista del Lago has
okay.
removed a very much amount of their lawn and cut their lake sizes down.
Lakes.
Oh, but where are the water for those coming from?
Where spring lakes are reclaimed from Scotts Valley. Scotts Valley
Okay,
water
oh, they got
sells them
they got the
reclaimed.
reclaim, okay.
Yeah,
What's Vista del Lago doing?
they have their own well,
Oh,
but
okay.
they've also cut way back because it's an expense to the park.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a for-profit park. Spring Lakes, they own their own.
Basically, those two are the primary feed for, what is it?
Carbonaro?
Creek. Oh, no, it's not Carbonaro. There's a creek there. It's, can't remember anyway. There's a creek that runs down there. It joins into Carbonaro, on, Glen Canyon.
Gotcha.
Okay, I think Lou can speak now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Great, I finally solved it. This may not be the proper forum for this question, but in all the prior information exchanges with the public on the rate study, I've not seen anything about an effort to reduce expenses. Is there anything that's going to be coming out on that regard?
You wanna, I don't know. I don't think there will be, other than communications that will come out at the time that will maybe talk about that. But you don't make that part of the rate study and the Prop 218 process itself. I mean, it can be part of the communications to the public. And Rick, you want to address that?
Well, I mean, that will be a question to ask, you know, given our whole process, we're trying to keep rates down as low as possible. And I don't know the areas that we could reach out and cut or reduce due to the fact that a lot of it's fixed, you know, electricity, fuel, and so forth. But there's not a lot of areas, you know, we don't have a big training, educational budget. We don't have, you know, we used to have educational grants. We do not. We have reduced a lot of that already, but we didn't have a lot to begin with. This district doesn't spend a lot of money in research and development. We have a pretty low rebate program and so forth. I mean, we're always open to ideas, but we don't have a lot of areas that wouldn't impact operations. I mean, our staffing, in my mind, is at a minimum level. We do have some salary savings that we haven't been able to fill positions. But, you know, we have an extremely heavy workload moving ahead with CZU and our capital improvement. So I don't see us cutting staff. So, you know, it's a good question and we should be prepared to answer it, but I don't see where we could make those reductions right now. A few years back, we went through all of our travel, training, subscriptions, and we cut it down to the bare minimum. We don't have a lot of, you know, I'm not going to call it fat, but we just don't have a lot of non-necessary expenses. Yeah.
Look at the building we work in.
I know.
Let me just, if
There's
I
a
may,
director I know that would probably have some ideas.
if I may make one more comment
Yeah.
on that.
Please, go ahead, Liz.
The cost reductions may not be a formal part of the 218 process, but historically it is included in that process. And I have in front of me an example of the Calaveras County Water District, which just went through the 218 rate increase process. And in it, they had a substantial section on reducing expenses, covering things like restructuring employee benefits, reduced debt service costs, in-house construction projects, and new technology for improved operational efficiency that amounted to the tens of millions of dollars over a capital period of 5 to 10 years. And that was a substantial part of their process. And even then, they scaled down their 218 process in terms of suggested rate increases because of negative feedback from the public. And I'm just saying, someone's going to ask the question like that the person before me said that, you know, what if we're doing to reduce costs? I mean, it seems like the only option we have is increasing costs, because that's clearly what the history is showing.
I mean, to
Go ahead,
suggest,
Jim.
if nothing else, Rick, we might be able to articulate the things we've already done, like bringing more things in-house. So at the very least, I know you've done some things. We need to, even if they're not going forward, we need to list those and say, this is what's already been done.
No, it's a fair question, and we should have an answer for it. There's no doubt. You know, I agree.
So I'm a little confused because it seemed like, at least in our process here, what we gave to the consultants was simply, here are the operating costs. And the assumption is that they would go up at the rate of inflation. And in terms of the process we've gone through, there's been no analysis of those operating costs. Like Lou was saying, that there'd be, that I don't see the consulting firm being
No,
making this part of the process. So it would have to come from staff if it's going to be part of the process.
I mean, I think if anything, where it did come into the process was at one point I argued that we should increase operating expenses at some fixed number above inflation.
Right.
And Rick and Kendra pushed back at me and said no. So I think that in itself, I'm not sure how exactly I want to, frame that, but I think what that shows is a commitment to not letting operating costs spiral out of control. And But you bring up a good point, Lou, that we need, to really think about this carefully as we roll it out. But as Jim Mosher says, it was not the consultant's job. It's not what they do during a rate study. And so here's where we are.
And I think what Lou's talking about is kind of how are we going to
Roll this out.
roll this out? And I had a number of, most of my comments had to do with that, really. Feel like it would be helpful if we could have the fixed charges, if we could break them down. We have the capital charge, we have watershed protection fee was used in Marin. Are there ways in which we can describe to people what it is they're paying for beyond just, this is what it costs to get the water to your house?
Oh,
Because,
yeah,
and
that would,
so
shouldn't be difficult to do. I mean,
I assume that would all be in the data pool, but it's just a matter of how we
Yeah.
get it out. And I think the issue of the school is really, really important. If the school faces a huge increase in water rates, it's going to have not only, it means that the school then has to make cuts elsewhere in their budget, and it's going to be a major political issue.
Can I
So-
interrupt there and see if Heather knows what category it's in? And if she,
Commercial.
okay.
Okay, so I
So
mean, it
then
will be
can we now
fixed.
see what the proposed increase in commercial is? Since that's a uniform rate.
Yeah, since it's uniform, then it's,
Can Teresa
Teresa.
do that?
Yeah, Teresa, is it possible to bring up the PowerPoint to where it would show the commercial rates?
We go,
Is
It's not in the beginning of the PowerPoint, because I noticed that it was never shown, but it's got to be somewhere in the back.
yeah, and so so you don't have
I'll
to
let
watch
you
me
go ahead and
scroll
do
through
that.
a bunch of slides. I just want to get to the right slide
Yeah,
before I.
go ahead
put
and
them.
do that, and I'll let Jim, when you find it, shout
Okay.
out. And, but in the meantime, I'll let Jim Mosher continue speaking.
And to keep in mind, the Felton schools all opt out of paying for Measure W when we did the Measure W. They did not.
Oh, I need sharing enabled again. Sorry for interrupting.
Had to go back to being the host to let
Oh,
Lou
okay.
speak. And
Oh, okay.
I'll send it back to her. Sorry, so she can share.
Would you repeat that, Rick, that they opted out of
The paying
paying?
Measure W, they had a choice.
So they did
The
not,
county and the schools, government had the choice to opt out, and they opted out.
so
they're
what
not
were they
paying
opting
Measure
out of?
W.
the $300.
The assessment. Well, it was a lot more for the schools, because they went by size of meter.
So they basically kind of,
So
No, they
Felton
had that-
schools
that-
opted
that
out
was
of that.
built into it, and they had that choice.
Hmm.
So that's a pretty good savings for schools, because it's set by meter size.
I guess my last comment is simply, we need to have this presented in a way, and I understand from the beginning that that wasn't the intent here
Yeah.
with this presentation, but maybe we could get Miller Maxfield
Yeah,
on this to help us
They're
put together.
planning, they're gearing up.
yeah, we need to have more of a sales.
Right, is there going to
Focus on
be, in the schedule, the board is going to consider this, that's going to be a regular board meeting. Will there be any session in which before we are into this is the 218, it's a up or down, thumbs up or down, in which people can see this and we can get some public input before we finalize it? Or is that not going to be
See
part of the
what,
schedule?
see what we're talking about today, or see the final presentation today?
See the proposal and I would assume, say, here are the options that we didn't choose and just get people a chance to hear this
Before we go into the Measure W.
before we go into the
Before we go
thumbs
into
up or thumbs
218,
down.
I'm
I
sorry.
mean, yeah, before we go
Yes.
into 218,
Because we're locked in.
because then we're locked in. We
Yeah.
won't be able to make any
So
changes.
we want public opinion before we go
I mean,
to 218 on what the board is,
Well, if we get 20 people coming in saying, if you make, there are things that we don't like about this, it seems like the board might want to have some of that feedback before making the final decision. That's all.
Mhm.
So here's, we'll come back to what you said,
Okay.
Jim, but Teresa's got this up for. So actually, the schools will be seeing a decrease.
Yeah, because that's from, you know, when we looked at that revenue neutrality slide at the very beginning, it looked like commercial, that commercial class that we created was kind of over.
Oh, well, that's great. That's great.
Adjustment. Gets
Terrific.
everything realigned.
And so, Heather, can you tell us the other ones, like where the parks are?
I was not able to get a hold of staff. It was Holly
Okay.
who was able to text staff. I was thinking that the parks would probably be in irrigation.
That seems logical to me.
That's where I would think that they would be in.
So we're talking county parks, basically?
Yeah.
Quail
Yeah.
Hollow and
Highlands.
Highlands.
Islands, yeah.
So
Mountain Commons.
it's an increase. So they're seeing an increase, whereas the schools see less. It's weird. Industrial goes down, but irrigation, and irrigation is presumably because of the peaking thing is the main.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it makes sense. We can show that they've not been the parks have not been paying equitably for all these years, so we're making it equitable now.
Mhm.
But we're not using the 3 tiers with them in order to promote conservation.
They would automatically go to the high tier.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't see the low tiers
Yes,
on those
Yes.
meters.
but there would be no tiers.
Right, there would be no tiers, even if there was.
Right, okay.
Okay.
And the majority of our customers are single family, so that's where the tiers kick.
Right.
And Jim?
I've got a doctor's appointment at 3:45 in
okay.
Scotts Valley.
So what I would like to do is get a sense from us and potentially even a motion about what to do to recommend to the board. And at least I think what I'm hearing is that most of us prefer the 45% to stabilize and the 3-tier, partly because that it should benefit the most to the, but I guess I would personally like to see a re-examination of the nature of the tiering there, whether we can make it steeper, so that that we decrease the bill a little bit so that there isn't such a big jump for the lowest water users. But if we were to have a motion that we recommended to the board that we adopt a water rate schedule that involved 45% fixed charge and 3 tiers.
I would second that. Given, with the addition of your caveat, can we increase the?
Right.
I would second that.
Okay.
But I don't think it should be part of the motion, but I just think we should be really trying to figure out how to get that lowest tier for low-income people, maybe by expanding the LIRA program, that we can show that for the people, water in California is supposed to be a human right, that we need to do everything we can for the folks who have limited incomes to be able to afford it, that we should consider matching the increase at the lowest tier with an increase in the LIRA program.
I think the
But
LIRA program is the way to go because it doesn't affect the tiers, because some low income are families.
Yeah,
right.
And they
that's
use, it's not
exactly.
just a
That's right.
senior citizen uses a unit of water a month.
Yeah.
It can be a family of
Right.
3 or 4
I just think
and have issues.
Yeah,
we may-
I'm
that this is the time to do it. It doesn't really affect the revenue very much. And it's a way of being equitable with this essential part of living in the valley. So,
I agree, because the thing is I think there's only so much that you can put on low water users, because I think you're right, that those are not necessarily the poor people. They're people that are
Living-
single residents, and that I'll bet
Right.
you a lot of low income people have kids and they live in an older place that has, no water efficiency at all.
Yeah,
And
you're right.
so they are not the low water users.
Hmm.
And so some way of directly subsidizing them is a much more is
I think if we made the program more, I was looking at the poverty rates, it's probably about 4 or 5%, so we're probably talking 200 houses maybe.
But we don't have any disadvantaged communities in our water district.
Right.
So, that's hard to
How
say.
many would qualify for the little
Right.
program? It's probably
Yeah.
200 to 300, I don't know.
Well, we still
Well,
have,
I
we
mean,
still
we-
haven't exhausted all the funds last I checked.
I know.
We have, a rate relief program at this point.
It would just be a matter of expanding.
And
And
we
I
don't
think
get-
if you made it
we
more
don't
per
get-
month, you get
we don't
people
get a
more
whole lot of
interested in
people in it.
qualifying.
Well, there are the two ways to expand it. One would be to make the amount of money more worthwhile.
Yeah.
Right, to
Right.
apply. The other is to, and I'm not sure I want to do this because it sounds like a lot of work, but to raise the income
Yeah,
level.
it's, we,
Because right now we're tied
when we
into
instituted it,
PGA.
I know you talked about this, it is a huge amount of work and the advantage of using the PG&E thing, it means that staff, it
We don't
really
have staff.
reduces staff.
Yeah.
So I think we have to stick with that as a
Investigation.
practical matter, otherwise it becomes too expensive.
So
We can't
just,
manage that if we didn't use. the
so just
previous
raising
PG&E.
So, but if we
Wow.
raised it to $30, I think people would notice it.
Mhm.
okay,
Anyway,
all right.
And we targeted a lot of the customers that had late notice and so forth. We tried to reach out.
right.
All right, so here's my revised motion, if you don't mind. You seconded the original one, but that the Budget and Finance Committee recommends to the board that we adopt a rate schedule that uses a 45% fixed charge, and that involves 3 tiers to a tiered rate for residential. And with an expansion of the LIRA program to address the lowest income people in the valley.
He also wanted steeper tiers.
With steeper tiers.
Well, we may not need that if we expand the LIRA, right?
Well, I think I don't want to say steeper tiers because that is a recommendation that steeper with respect to what? Because they're not even necessarily, we're not going to take this presentation to the board. I mean, I'm hoping that Sudhir is going to go back and come up with a
They'll
new
come back cleaner.
number, and then that's what we're going to.
Okay, got it.
So
Okay,
that's why I'm not including it in the recommendation.
okay.
All right, so did you get that, Holly?
Yes.
More or less,
I'll
okay,
record it.
thank you.
Can I ask how you're funding the LIRA program?
Property tax.
Okay, you do have property taxes, okay.
I second that one.
Okay,
For
any comment from the public?
The public being
Lou
Lou.
Ferris has a hand up.
Go ahead, Lou.
I show my hand is down.
Oh, okay. Well, in any case, did you want to say something?
No, not on this
Okay,
subject, no,
all right.
thanks.
In that case, Holly, would you take a roll call vote, please?
Gail Mayhood,
Aye.
Jeff Hill,
Aye.
Jim Bond,
Aye.
Jim Mosier.
Aye.
Okay,
Motion passed.
I know you have to leave
I do.
shortly, so is there any final question or comment that people want to make?
No.
Are we using property taxes as a revenue offset, Teresa? I'm not sure whether you're talking about increasing the LIRA allowance for the community.
It doesn't even enter into the rate study because this is a form of income that is
Separate?
pretty trivial. What is it? It's like rentals for
There's a couple hundred thousand.
telecommunication. I think we spend things like telecommunication
Don't we get
towers
some
and some of
property
the other
tax?
forms of
Yeah,
income,
close to
because
$1 million.
we can't use the rate.
It's
income.
not used at, it doesn't come from revenue.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah.
just, it's property tax.
It's
Yeah.
incidental.
yeah.
Yeah, small to the district, big for a couple hundred people.
It's- I don't think it makes you do anything, Sudhir, in terms of that, because it's separate.
Yeah, the thing I was getting at is if you're using property taxes right now as a revenue offset, so to speak, then increasing the LIRA program would tend to increase the rates on everybody else, which is fine, doesn't affect 218, but just to make you aware, then it'll when you're drawing money out of your revenue stream, the rates for other customers has to go up.
The size of our LIRA program right now is so small, we're not talking
Small.
about
Okay,
$10,000, if that.
I
Okay,
see. Okay.
So,
Okay.
in other words, and if we expand it, it's not going to go to more than 20. So it's not a number that, thank you for pointing that out, but it's not a number that really impacts.
It's lost in the noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's to the right of decimal.
Decimal
Okay.
dust is what we use.
If there are no objections, I will then adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for a really good discussion, and thank you to Teresa and Sudhir for coming and explaining all these things to us, and thank you, Heather, for sitting through this with us and getting the feedback you've gotten today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.